I spend a lot of time thinking about the meaning of life. Like, no exaggeration, like, why are we here sort of stuff. I think about God and I think about the meaning of life, and the two of them, it's like a ping pong table while I'm watching the ball go back and forth as I try to conceive of both of these answers. And I've drawn from great literature and profound spiritualists who have come before us for guidance. And the best that I've come up with, I'll actually take a step back. I'll share with you the best that I've come up with. And maybe it will resonate and help you on your journey as well. And so the Hindu faith refers to this realm as the illusion. They call it the Maya. We're existing in an illusionary state. Yogananda once said that he marveled at how well the divine hid in plain sight, and yet we weren't able to see him. And then if you go into the early Christians or the Gnostics even, they referred to it as a dream. They said you have incarnated into a dream state. And the belief actually was that not only are you in a dream as if you're a character in God's dream, but that God granted you the ability to dream so that you too could experience what it was like to conceive of a dream. Right? As if one day God will awaken and we'll all disappear, and all that will be left will be the memory, the way we wake up in the morning and remember a dream, and then it's forgotten a day or two later. And the Course in Miracles has actually a really clean explanation for it when defining the ego. It said the ego is anything that gives you the belief that somehow, some way you are separate from God. And that, I thought, was brilliant. It just pulled it all together. What is the illusion? What dream are we in? We're in a place where we don't realize that we are divine. We are divine, eternal beings. And we are in no way more separate from God than a wave is separate from an ocean. We are the motion in that ocean. We are actually existing in a divine space. And the moment we drop the body, we have a knowing that washes right over us. And we have this realization that, in fact, we dropped into the human body to see if we could remember that we're of God. And so as I think through this circumstance, as I actually process what I believe to be true, I then naturally want to put some practical tools in place to maximize the incarnation and to find my way back to our source, back to our Creator. And not only do I want to go back to the divine, but I want to encourage everybody else to come back with me. And so to that end, I'm going to reflect on two pieces of literature, and then I'll go ahead and give you the practical tools that I've implemented to kind of affirm this journey. And so the first one comes from the trusty Bible, and that is the book of Ecclesiastes, which is part of the wisdom literature that I oftentimes reflect on. The wisdom literature is made up of 3 books, so the book of Job, the Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Job. It's kind of in that order that people typically read them. And in the book of Ecclesiastes, it tries to reflect on the meaning of our incarnation or existence. And it uses the word cheved. You keep hearing it over and over as written. It's like over 40 times. And it's funny because you don't know who wrote the book. It's like an anonymous piece of literature. There's an author and there's a scholar, right? So there's a writer and a scholar, and they're going back and forth, and you hear this information coming through on how to live the best life and what it is that you're here to experience. And yet all throughout the discussion, over and over, cheved. And there's a lot of mistranslation of it, where the word that comes up is, your life is meaningless. They say life is just meaningless. Like, don't put too much thought into it. It's too meaningless. And it's actually not a good explanation, because a cleaner translation of cheved would be more like something that you can't quite grab hold of. Almost like a vapor, or maybe like smoke, that you can see it and you believe it's there, but your efforts to hold it will always fail. And as you read through the book of Ecclesiastes, it actually paints a somewhat depressing picture. It says no matter what you do with your life will come to an end and you will be forgotten, just as the people before you have lived their lives, and most of them quite readily have been forgotten. And this belief that maybe you become accomplished at something, but then it reflects, it says, but what do you have to sacrifice to become quite accomplished? At what expense? And maybe you grow too old to even appreciate the fruit of your labor. And if you have inheritances, who's to say that those that inherit it will even appreciate your hard work and what they've inherited? We all know what happens with overprivileged children who have never had to toil or work for themselves to earn anything. And it goes through other scenarios. It says, well, maybe the path is one of profound wisdom, to be the wise old men. And it says, well, that doesn't necessarily guarantee anything. No more than becoming a profound spiritualist or a righteous man guarantees anything. Because terrible things happen to learned men and righteous men. There's just no guarantee. Life is like smoke. We just can't grab hold of it. And as the literature matures along, and you realize that so much of the advice that you've received around how it is to be successful and to live well and to take care of yourself and others and so on and so forth, it offers you no assurances in any which way that things will work out for you. And the grand conclusion of the book, which is what I love the most, is it says that in light of all this, don't find yourself depressed. Don't even try to figure it out necessarily. It says, sure, leaning on wisdom, becoming wise in your ways, in all likelihood things will be better for you. So you can incorporate that, and pursuing the spiritual in all likelihood will be a great advantage. But don't count on it. Rather, focus on love in the moment. Focus on the joys that you can experience by having a cup of coffee with a friend or going for a walk in the park, feeding the birds. Focus on the joy of sitting with a great piece of literature with the Wi-Fi turned off, all on your own, without a single interruption for an hour, and just indulge in the brilliance of another person's writing. That's the message of Ecclesiastes, is to be joyous and to be in the moment as best as you can, each and every day, with a great deal of gratitude for the joys as they're being presented. And in the rare event that there's no joy within your day, to go out of your way to start orchestrating joy, actively choosing joy. The next book, which comes to me, so I'm going to go from Ecclesiastes, I'm going to skip ahead about 3,000 years, 3,500 years. This is a personal favorite. I read it about a decade ago, actually. And this is a book written by Viktor Frankl. So it's Man's Search for Meaning. And if you know the story behind Frankl, he was Austrian. I believe he's an Austrian Jew who had free passage to the US just prior to the war's outbreak. But he declined because he wanted to be close to his family. And he felt that if he left his two elderly parents, that the worst would happen to them, and he just couldn't bear to leave them alone and vulnerable. And so he ended up staying, and shortly afterwards wound up in the death camps, the Nazi camps. And he went in with a manuscript that was actually sewn into his coat. He had it. He had worked on it for years and years and years. And he just wanted to get through this experience and make sure that that manuscript was still intact. And of course, shortly afterwards, it was confiscated. It was never seen again. Frankl watched countless horrors in those years in the camps. And he ended up losing both of his parents. And he ended up coming out of the camp, hoping that somehow, some way, family members would have likewise survived. And he realized he was completely alone. Everything he had been taken from him. His family members were gone. There was nothing left. And over the course of he found himself in a deep, deep, deep depression. And when he finally pulled out of the depression, over the course of I think it was something ridiculous, like 8 or 9 days. It was a very, very short period. He went and he wrote this book. And this book has been regarded as one of the most influential spiritual texts of the 20th century. It's a short read. You can literally sit on a park bench for an hour or two on a couple days and get through it easily. And so I'm going to read to you a section of it. This is page 52. And you'll see the point that I'm making, I hope, as it moves along. And so you have to keep the context in mind. This is a man who is a brilliant academic mind, who's a trained psychologist, psychiatrist, who is effectively starving with a lot of his other inmates. And they're doing everything they can to just move through each of these days. So he writes, "Earlier I mentioned art. Is there such a thing in a concentration camp? It rather depends on what one chooses to call art. A kind of cabaret was improvised from time to time. A hut was cleared temporarily, and a few wooden benches were pushed or nailed together. A program was drawn up, and in the evening, those who had fairly good positions in the camp, the capos, and the workers, who did not have to leave the camp on distant marches, were able to assemble there. They came to have a few laughs or perhaps to cry a little, and anyway to forget. There were songs, poems, jokes, and some with underlying satire regarding the camp, and all were meant to help us forget. And they did help. The gatherings were so effective that a few ordinary prisoners went to see the cabaret in spite of their fatigue, and even though they missed their daily portions of food by going. During the half-hour lunch interval, when the soup, which the contractors paid for and which they did not spend much, was ladled out to our worksite, we were allowed to assemble in an unfinished engine room. On entering, everyone got a ladle full of the watery soup. While we sipped it greedily, a prisoner climbed onto the tub and sang Italian arias. We enjoyed the songs, and he was guaranteed a double helping of soup, straight from the bottom, and that meant with peas. And so I read the text, and I imagine being in those camps. And I imagine these men in those most horrific of circumstances, and women, and some occasional children that managed to make it. And here they are one night to the next, starving and exhausted and oftentimes freezing cold. And they did whatever they could to find joy. They did whatever they possibly could to forget their troubles for just a short while and come together as a group and sing or play. And so while this book is mostly oriented around searching for meaning, which is this idea that if you can find someone outside of yourself to care for, or something beyond yourself, the purpose that it creates will give you the motivation to keep going forward. Also coursing through this text is the beautiful vibration of gratitude, which in this case is a serving of soup from the bottom, so you actually got some peas, the gratitude. And then also finding joy wherever possible. For a day without joy is a day wasted. And so whether it's the teachings of Ecclesiastes or certainly the writings of Frankl and Man's Search for Meaning, it continues to point that even in the most desperate and dire of circumstances, that love and joy in the moment is one of the most important energies that we can manifest in this incarnation. And that brings me to the conclusion for why it is that I believe that we're here and how it is that we find alignment. I believe that whoever or whatever created this universe did it out of joy. It did it because it was a joyous expression. Doing nothing, arguably, would have been easier than doing something. So if we chose to do something, we chose to do it because it was joyous. Our Creator is joy. It's a joyous expression. And your incarnation will find alignment and the pull forward of the infinite Creator, provided it's a joyous incarnation. It doesn't have to be successful from a monetary standpoint. It doesn't have to be accomplished from a societal expectation standpoint or a parental expectation standpoint. The main reason for you to be here is to be joyous. And in many cases, the reason that there's so much adversity built into the incarnation is specifically so that you can choose joy. These struggles that we all have, the suffering that we all experience, create a catalyst by which we can choose joy. And the best and the easiest way to do that is, for starters, ask yourself, what is it that you do each day that's not joyous? And ask yourself if you have to continue to do it. And if the answer is no, then do the work to find out why you continue to do it. That can be a job, that can be your relationships. It can certainly involve the foods that you eat, the city in which you live, the lifestyle that you're keeping, the routine that you've created. If it's not joyous, why are you still doing it? There is an answer, but the answer is inward. It's not an outward answer usually. The second thing that I would say is, if you reflect back at the end of a day and you look at the day spent and it wasn't joyous, there wasn't laughter, there weren't moments of enjoyment, ask yourself where you can insert joy in the day coming to create more balance in the day spent and the day to come. And if you're having trouble finding joyous moments or things that you enjoy doing, and over the last couple of years, a lot of people have had such lifestyle impairment that joy became more and more elusive, I would say start to lean on gratitude as a conduit to find your joy. So the things that you're most grateful for will almost always lead you down a path to realize joy. If all of that fails, if you're still not experiencing joy, right, the last two suggestions I can give you, one is simply ask for guidance. Before you go to bed or sometime during the day, just say out loud, you have to call to somebody and ask for greater guidance and clarity on what can be changed or where there's joy available. And then to take that one step further, always and forever, you can simply pray that joy comes. Pray for a more joyous life. And then whatever is to be, let it be. Recognize that you don't always have the answers when things drop out of your life, whether they're friends or family, whether careers get pulled out from under you, or whether you have to stand in your truth and your courage and that ends up costing you some type of relationship or commitment. Recognize that most of it is happening for a very good reason that's just not always apparent. And if you continue to exist in this state of consciousness, where you're incrementally adding joy into your days, where you're reflecting on the days spent and asking whether or not they were joyous, where you're bringing things that are joyous into your life and allowing the things that really aren't to go by the wayside, right? Where you still introduce wisdom and spiritual intention, but you recognize that it's like smoke. We just don't have a great handle on why it is that we're here, and we never will. And to just do all that you can to raise your vibration to align with the infinite creator's vibration, and to expect somehow, some way, that that joyous vibration will end up working well. It'll end up working well. Because if God created this out of any energy, let's imagine that he created it out of joy. And let's find our joy as well to align with that energy. All right, everyone. In love and light as always. We'll speak again soon.